I want to start today's show by making a very clear statement that this is not a joke. This is not a parody. This is not satire. This is a very real thing that is happening, and I'm going to read an article to you now that in part sounds utterly preposterous and ridiculous, and I have included an absolutely tremendous amount of links and screenshots within the article to back every single detail up. The Linux Foundation, the GNOME Foundation, and several other open source organizations and foundations, very prominent ones, have pledged to support the needs of the United Nations to promote DEI discrimination and rise. This is all a very, very real thing. I'm going to read the article to you now. I just published this at a couple of places where the Lunduke Journal publishes articles, and holy heavens, this is absolutely preposterous. Here I go. Who controls open source is a fascinating topic. Some of the largest open source foundations are primarily funded by corporations which, by most estimations, have not historically been fans of open source or of free software. Case in point, the Linux Foundation, which brings in roughly $1/3 of $1 billion per year, or over $300 million yearly, is heavily funded by corporate sponsors such as Microsoft, Hitachi, Meta, or Tencent, big companies, all of which derive the majority of their revenue from proprietary systems. Likewise, Mozilla, which brings in over $600 million annually, is almost entirely funded by Google. And as much as Google likes to talk about open source, the majority of their revenue is derived from proprietary systems. So, as the saying goes, he who controls the purse strings controls how the money is spent. And of course, we must also consider the political control and influence over open source. Many large open source foundations and organizations have deep, often financial ties to political activism organizations, both Mozilla and Wikimedia being some of the more well-known examples. And again, as I'm citing all of these, if you want to follow along and look at the detailed articles that I'm linking to, many of which I wrote, but have just huge numbers of sources, please feel free. Check my work, check the details, check the facts, because this is all very real stuff. Okay, now buckle up, Buttercup, because all of that, all of the terribly depressing things that I just told you, it's about to get a whole lot worse. Enter the United Nations. You already know it's going to be bad. Back in March of this year, of 2025, the United Nations announced that 16 organizations had signed on to what they called the United Nations Open Source Principles. Okay? The United Nations Open Source Principles is a set of 8 core principles which open source organizations are vowing to adhere to. 5 of those 8 principles being fairly obvious, and considering the topic of open source, not all that surprising. For example, it has expected things like make open source the standard approach, right? You'd expect that. Okay. And encourage active participation in open source. Okay, great. Oh, and make security a priority, right? Now, these are very, very bland statements, very run-of-the-mill statements. Sure, fine, great. I can understand why an open source organization might choose to pledge to follow such ideals, because in theory, they were possibly doing those things anyway, right? I mean, if they're already advocating open source and they're already pushing open source and making open source, well, they're doing those open source things. So why not pledge to do them? Because you're already doing them. No big deal. Get it. However, 3 of the UN open source principles raise significant red flags. Which that may be the understatement of the year. And for those of you listening to the audio podcast version, again, I'll link to the article wherever you're getting the show so you can follow along. I've got lots of screenshots in here. For those of you watching the video version, you can just follow the video. Right here is the UN open source principles: open by default, contribute back, secure by design, etc., etc., etc. Okay. Let's go over the 3 red flag raising items in order, in chronological order that they're listed, and honestly, in order of least terrifying to most terrifying, right? Now, and I want to make it very clear that every signatory organization has agreed to these things, and we're going to go over who those are in a moment. Okay, the first one we're going to talk about is item number 4. Foster inclusive participation and community building, enabling and facilitating diverse and inclusive contributions, end quote. Notice the repeated usage of the words like inclusive and diverse. Over the last several years, these have become code words for discriminate against people we don't like. We've seen this time and time again with companies like Red Hat and IBM building entire corporate policies around what skin color they want in their employees, right? IBM and Red Hat made a point about saying we want to hire less or fewer white men. And they hid behind words like inclusive and diverse. Inclusive, diverse, over and over again. And the United Nations wants open source organizations to commit to that form of systemic discrimination. Now, already, just with that one line item, that's not great. It's discriminatory, it's DEI, it's woke, it's not great. But that's the least offensive item. It gets far, far worse from here. Let's jump down to item number 7. Rise. Recognize, incentivize, support, and empower. Empowering individuals and communities to actively participate. End quote. Now, a lot of you may be saying to yourself, what the heck is a rise? That sentence that you just read reads like a bunch of corporate buzzword mumbo jumbo, but it has a very real, very sinister meaning behind it. So what is rise, you ask? It is a codified framework for encouraging exactly the type of discrimination that we just talked about. It has become an increasingly widely used tactic among DEI advocates. Now, I'm going to walk you through this here. RISE is an acronym for recognize, incentivize, support, and empower. I'm going to walk you through what they mean by that for each one. Recognize the contributions of underrepresented or marginalized groups and highlight the achievements of diverse employees over non-diverse employees. Right? So if you see someone of a ethnic group that you prefer, recognize them and ignore the white man or the Asian man. Okay. The second word, I. Incentivize underrepresented groups with things like internships, promotions, scholarships, bonuses, etc., to encourage diversity. In other words, discrimination. Discriminate against people based on the color of their skin or their sex. S, for support underrepresented or marginalized groups with tailored resources to ensure equitable outcomes. In other words, no meritocracy. Put meritocracy out the window, or at least de-emphasize meritocracy in favor of equity, of giving people, specific people, who have the right skin color or the right sex or some other right characteristic where they're in the correct group. Give them tailored resources to ensure that they do at least as well, if not better than, the people that they don't like. The white men, the straight men, the Asian men, right? And then finally, E, empower diverse individuals with leadership roles in order to promote DEI. And the idea behind that one is simple. Find people who have benefited from DEI, right? So DEI hires, put them in position of leaderships where they can advocate for more DEI. It's pretty straightforward. You can see the whole point of this, the whole point of RISE is to make DEI more common and more entrenched. Now, sometimes discussion around RISE specifically includes language regarding DEI and diversity. Other times, that exact language is left out, but the core goals and motives remain consistently DEI focused. Sometimes the RISE presentations and policies kind of drop the DEI words in order to squeak past the various anti-DEI laws that are out there, but it all remains the same. It is, in essence, a corporate speak checklist for encouraging discrimination. Not great. But that brings us to the last UN open source principle, the one which quite possibly raises the largest red flag of all, and this one I find absolutely horrific. Number 8, sustain and scale. Supporting the development of solutions that meet the evolving needs of the United Nations system and beyond. End quote. Did you catch that? Open source organizations which sign onto this compact are pledging to, quote, support the development of solutions that meet the needs of the United Nations. Or, put another way, those organizations are pledging to do the bidding of the UN, whatever that might be. The United Nations is asking these open source organizations to pledge fealty to them. That may sound extreme and ridiculous. And you know what? It is. It is extreme and it is utterly ridiculous. But read back over the words, because that's exactly what's happening. I read over those words so many times. I showed it to multiple people that I respect, and I'm like, am I wrong on this? I've been working on this particular piece for weeks now because it sounds so utterly crazy to me. And I've contacted people at the United Nations. I've contacted people at almost every single one of the organizations listed here. I've talked to numerous people who have worked in the industry and worked around government, in the technology side of things of government and all sorts of things. And the few people that I've gotten to respond to me about that, because I tell you what, the United Nations did not respond. I were like, yeah, well, that's what that means. Supporting the development of solutions that meet the needs of the UN. So you have to support the needs of the United Nations. Whew, they're pledging fealty. Now, which open source organizations are we talking about here? Quite a few of the big names, in fact. Names which will be very familiar to the Lunduke Journal readers, including the Linux Foundation, the people who run the Linux kernel, and some, like a bazillion different little sub-foundations. The high performance and computing cluster groups and blah, 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 blah. Cloud Native Foundation, so many groups. The GNOME Foundation. Yeah, you knew they were going to be on there, right? The Eclipse Foundation. Oh, the Document Foundation. Some of you were saying the Document Foundation. What the heck's the Document Foundation? The people behind LibreOffice. Yeah. The developers of LibreOffice just pledged fealty to the United Nations. And so many others, so many others. Heck, even Nextcloud and Matrix have signed on. So here's the list. So the Open Source Initiative, European Open Source Academy, Linagora, Matrix.org, Nextcloud, Open Forum Europe, Open Infra Foundation, Open Knowledge Foundation, Rocket Chat, Rousseau de Transport d'Electricité, the Sovereign Tech Agency, the Document Foundation, the GNOME Foundation, the Linux Foundation, Linux Professional Institute, or LBI, Zendis, Center for Digital Sovereignty, and the Eclipse Foundation. They've all signed on. And many of these organizations and others recently met in person at the United Nations in New York to discuss, among other things, this formal agreement, this compact, the UN Global Digital Compact, as it is known. So in June of this year, just a hair under 2 months back, the United Nations hosted the UN Open Source Week and invited a who's who of organizations which control open source in one form or another, along with a number of smaller organizations, ones which are politically aligned with the United Nations. And this gathering was officially named an Open Community for the Global Digital Compact. And this ran from June 16th through June 20th. So I guess just like a month and a half ago. And it was co-hosted by the United Nations. It was hosted by the United Nations, but there's just two different groups within the UN. It was officially the UN and then the Office of Information and Communications Technology at the UN. So who did the United Nations make a point of inviting to speak to those who were in attendance, right? Because it's interesting to look at what actually is being told to people. Let's go down the list, right? Let's go down the list of some of the interesting ones here. First of all, the Gates Foundation and Mozilla were there, including the executive director of the Mozilla Foundation and the deputy director over at the Gates Foundation. Because, of course, the Gates Foundation and Mozilla were there. Holy heavens. Also, Amazon was there. And I kid you not, this is very, very real. The World Bank. The World Bank was there, speaking to people. Presenting and keynoting and whatnot. Let's see. GitLab was there. GitLab, yep, the CTO of GitLab, as well as the vice president over at the Wikimedia Foundation, the folks behind Wikipedia. Man, for those of you who regularly read and listen to and watch the Lunduke Journal, you're going down the list of check. All of these are people that are doing really shady things. We've had lots and lots of stories about these organizations before, and here they are all in one place, invited under one roof by the United Nations. Oh, and speaking of which, Mastodon. Yeah, the Mastodon decentralized social network. They were there as well. One of the board of directors of Mastodon. Now, I found that fascinating. So Mastodon is small, right? In most ways, even considering the size of their social media network, they're fairly small. But Mastodon aligns strongly to the political goals and views of the United Nations, promote leftist extremism, and censor political opponents. There's specific countries that Mastodon tends to oppose, specific political parties that Mastodon opposes, and they regularly and extremely censor, block, and ban anyone who is the wrong politics or from the wrong country or supporting the wrong country. And that all aligns really closely with the United Nations. So Mastodon may not be huge, but they're a friend of theirs. GitHub, of course, GitHub is there. Now, why is that a big deal? Well, it means Microsoft is there. Among other things. And there's a ton others as well, but those are the ones that jumped out at me initially. Just ones that get covered by the Lunduke Journal regularly. And in addition, representatives from most of the signatories of that United Nations Open Source Principle Agreement that we just talked about were in attendance, including the GNOME Foundation, including the new executive director of the GNOME Foundation. And some of the presentations were about things like ethical software, interoperability with United Nations systems, public infrastructure, digital cooperation of governments, and of course, inclusion. Lots and lots of inclusion. And many presentations by many organizations which already raise significant concerns. I mean, all those things I just listed, there's some pretty concerning things. Anytime someone says, we need to work on ethical software licensing, I'm like, oh, okay, this isn't going to go well. Lots of red flags there. But, and this is really important, what did they talk about behind closed doors? What was discussed out of the public eye at the many meetings and events where attendees were wined and dined? If you go through the list of events that were occurring, that were being sponsored by weird NGOs and big tech corporations and the United Nations themselves, where they're having little parties and soirees and whatnot, what were they talking about there? I mean, this is fairly important to know. But all of that remains a secret. All of it remains completely unknown. The Lunduke Journal has asked. The Lunduke Journal has asked repeatedly. The United Nations is not talking. And neither are the attendees of this United Nations event. Neither are the signatories of the United Nations Open Source Principle and Compact. They're staying real quiet about all of it. But we now know, with a very high level of certainty, that many of the significant open source organizations and foundations now serve three distinct masters. The corporations, which fund their work, by and large. And these corporations, most of them are not historically big fans of open source or free software. Yet they are funding the open source work. The second are the political activists. And again, some of these are funding some of the work that's being done here, especially things like Mozilla and Wikimedia and others. And these activist organizations, in many cases, have infiltrated many of these organizations and foundations. So the highest level of leaderships is influenced in one way or the other by these political activists. And now the third master is the United Nations. Now, I don't know about you, but I wouldn't want to have those three masters. Like, if I woke up in the morning and I realized that I was beholden to the wishes and commands of multiple big tech corporations who, point blank, really don't like me, political activists who, if I disobey them, they will tar and feather me in the streets, and the United Friggin' Nations, oh man, I would have 14 panic attacks before breakfast. That is horrific. Now, as always, the Lunduke Journal encourages representatives and leaderships from any organization involved with this story to reach out for any reason. It could be corrections, clarifications, additional information, anything at all. Considering the professed commitment to openness of every single organization mentioned in this story, including the United Nations, who claims to be real open, there should be no reason on God's green earth to continue refusing to speak to journalists regarding any of the things that were talked about in this story. No reason at all. No, I should amend that. No good reason. The only reasons I can think to not address some of this At least some of it is to hide things. Likewise, if you are part of any of these organizations, an employee, a volunteer, work for a consultant or a contractor that did some work with them, whatever. If you would like to become a whistleblower, there are multiple ways to get a hold of the Lunduke Journal. If you go to lunduke.com and scroll down to the bottom of the page, there is a Become a Tech Whistleblower link. Click it. You can email me. You can send me a message on X. There's ways to get a hold of me and stay completely anonymous. You can let me know who you are, but still request anonymity and not be outed. The Lunduke Journal has never exposed the identity of a whistleblower. And we've been publishing leaks from Adobe, Microsoft, IBM, Red Hat, and on for years now. Huge, massive leaks. More leaks out of the tech industry than any other publication over the last, 5-10 years. And never has the Lunduke Journal divulged any identifiable information regarding whistleblowers with inside in any corporation. The Lunduke Journal takes great pride in that, and that will stay the case into the future. And this should be very clear to everyone at this point that sunlight is the best disinfectant. And this story needs a heck of a lot of sunlight because there's a lot of really shady things going on here. A lot of them. And you'll notice if you go read the article that there are a lot of links to other articles published by the Lunduke Journal. In-depth, lengthy, well-cited, well-sourced, very backed up, from here to kingdom come, super backed up articles. And in every case, the topic of those articles, of that those stories are about, the corporations and foundations those stories are about, has stayed silent about all of them. There's a lot of sunlight needed here. So we're putting this out there. Now, this story regarding the United Nations and open source and all of these open source foundations basically pledging fealty to the United Nations. This is only the beginning of this story. There's a lot here. And I anticipate a lot more over the weeks and months to come. If you know anything, get a hold of the Lunduke Journal. There are a lot of holes that we need filled in. There are a lot of details that we need to understand so that we can understand what these organizations are doing, because it has a tremendous impact on users of open source, developers of open source, corporations interacting with organizations developing open source. Like, it's all over the map. The amount of governments using open source, there is a lot here that needs to be understood by a lot of parties. This impacts the entirety of the computer industry, all of government, all over the map, and just average people. There's a lot going on here. Thank you to the Lunduke Journal subscribers. Go on over to lunduke.com. Again, all the links are there where you can listen, watch, read, interact with, and find ways to support the Lunduke Journal. At lunduke.com, that's where everything is. And thank you to the supporters of the Lunduke Journal, because without you, this coverage would not be possible. I think it goes without saying to point out that it is impossible to do this sort of coverage and actually be sponsored by advertisers and big tech corporations. Every other major tech news outlet out there derives the majority of their revenue from big tech corporations providing advertisement. The Lunduke Journal is unique that we do not. And it is entirely thanks to the subscribers and donations from people like you. So go to lunduke.com and pitch in a few bucks if you feel like you can, and help keep the Lunduke Journal doing what the Lunduke Journal does. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, nerds and nerdettes alike, across this glorious inner tube of ours, I do declare, end broadcast.